the chances, realistically, of any real substantive talks?
Well, that's a very good question, Ali John. And of course, when it comes to Syria, we have to talk about justice and accountability as being just as important as reconciliation and reform. So what this committee is intending to do is to reform the Syrian constitution after a long debate between both sides, the opposition side and the Assad regime. They mutually agreed to the names that will sit down at the negotiating table. Now, how realistically can we expect this committee to lead to some sort of grand political bargain? We have to remain very cautiously optimistic at this stage. Now, look, I was there in Geneva in 2014. That was the first ever UN-hosted peace talks between the opposition and the Assad regime. Back then, there was hope for a much more comprehensive political solution. It seems now with this constitutional committee, the focus has significantly narrowed down towards what many hope to be some sort of sustainable reforms that could maybe give the opposition a seat at the table in Damascus. Of course, you know, let's not forget that this is an Assad regime that is in much more better position this year around than it was in 2014 militarily on the ground with Russia's backing and the Russian Air Force. So many analysts are skeptical that the Assad regime will give much at the negotiating table.
You talked about Russia right now. Let's get into that. You also say that this is an attempt to reform the country's constitution. The Syrian envoy said this will be a door opener in terms of to a wider political process that meets the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. How much is Russia going to be on board with this?
Well, interestingly enough, this is the 4-year anniversary of the Russian military intervention in Syria in 2015. And because of that intervention, the Assad regime was able to gain a significant amount of ground in Syria. So big questions on whether or not really Assad will have any incentive to give away any political concessions to the opposition, which is in a much weaker position than it was during those UN-hosted talks. And of course, interestingly enough, this was also an occasion where the Syrian opposition released a statement showing some harrowing statistics. Per the opposition report, the Russian Air Force was responsible for nearly 7,000 civilian deaths in 4 years. So that's coming out of the Syrian opposition, a very harrowing statistic. Big questions on whether or not Bashar al-Assad will negotiate in good faith, given the massive destruction caused by his forces. But of course, with the UN leading the effort, the fact that the talks are happening in the beginning is itself a good sign.
And we've been talking about that the number one thing that needs to happen for the war to stop is a political solution, and this is a step towards it. All right, Oubai,
Indeed.
thank you very much.